Hello, everyone. Welcome to Making It Rain Bits and Bytes, the rise of FinTech in Africa. Thank you to the Segal Family Foundation and the BMW Foundation for hosting this summit. We are so
I think Lewam has internet challenges. She must be back in a few. Maybe we just start introducing ourselves. By the time she's back, she will introduce the panel. Shall we do that, guys? Yes, let's go. I'm already talking. So my name is Amel Saidane. I'm a co-founder and CEO of BetaCube. It's a tech venture builder focusing on fintech and mobility. And we support exceptional founders to go from the idea to MVP, market validation, and fundraising. I'm also co-founder and president of Tunisian Startups, the association giving a voice to the Tunisian startup ecosystem. To you, Munya.
Thank you very much, Amel. My name is Munya. I'm the head of business, head of growth for Flutterwave. For those who may not be familiar with Flutterwave, we are a payments infrastructure company. We are active in about 28 African countries. We support businesses really across the globe in order to make it easy to do business across Africa. So when you look at the challenges of just moving money really across the continent, Flutterwave is core within making it easier for businesses to do business across Africa. So excited to be on the panel.
Brilliant.
Over to you, Bram.
Thank you. So my name is Bram, and I'm the co-founder and also chief commercial officer for Angle Dimension, which is a fintech based in Malawi. And we are strong on the eKYC, as well as creating the digital wallet for the group savings. And so we are expanding into Tanzania, Zambia, and Botswana. So aside from that, I'm also the president of the ICT Association of Malawi, which is an apex body for the professionals in Malawi on the policy side. Happy to be here and excited about the conversation. Thank you.
Amazing. So I just suggest as an improvised moderator to just dive into the topic. So how about we discuss the biggest problems fintech can solve for Africa? Since we are all entrepreneurs, the first thing we think of is actually what's the problem we're trying to solve here. So how about we start with you, Munya?
Thank you very much, Mel. So for us as Flutterwave, and putting my Flutterwave hat on, is that we exist as a business to solve the complex challenges for entrepreneurs and businesses that want to do business across Africa and the world. So when you look at the reality of Africa being 54 countries, we always talk about it at Flutterwave is that we want Africa to feel like it's a country. The reality on the ground is that if I'm doing business in Nigeria versus South Africa versus Tunisia, or even Malawi, it's very, very different. You look at the payments infrastructure, you look at the payment behavior of consumers, very, very different. And for us, it's critical when you look at what we do as a business is to solve the interoperability challenges across the continent. So for us, it continues to be our core, and that is certainly one of the bigger challenges that you hear from businesses that I'm a Kenyan business. How do I scale across multiple countries? And so for us, that's key in terms of being able to drive that additional value for entrepreneurs and businesses that are really looking to expand across the continent.
Nice. Lewam is back. Lewam, we have just started diving into the first conversation of the biggest problems fintechs can solve for the African continent. But maybe you can introduce yourself and take over from there.
Thank you so much, Amel. I appreciate that. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties. Hi, my name is Lewam Kefela. I'm an investment director at Village Capital. We invest in early stage ventures that are tech-enabled, that are focused on solving major world problems. I'm currently dialing in from Nairobi, Kenya, and super excited to be able to host this conversation and join my fellow panelists as we talk about the future of fintech and its role in social good. I'm not sure that anybody heard any of the housekeeping reminders, so I'll just quickly go through them again. There will be simultaneous English to French interpretation for this session, so access instructions should be in the session description. We will be reserving some time towards the end of the session for Q&A, so feel free to add your questions into the Q&A tab. The session will also be recorded and available here in the attendee hub in case you're not able to attend the entire session. Great. I think if everybody has introduced themselves, we can dive in.
Yeah, let's go.
Great. So my first question, and I believe Munya already started to answer this. We've seen that there's a lot of buzz about fintech in Africa. Fintech has been the most funded sector on the continent, and 5 out of our 7 unicorns are fintech companies. But how does that actually impact social good? And what is the biggest problem fintech can solve for Africa?
Should I jump
Munya,
in?
Amel, yeah, I would love for you to jump in.
Okay.
Sure.
Wait a minute.
So I think some of the problems fintechs are trying to solve are crucial actually to the development, economic development of the continent, but also social stability and inclusion. So when you look at the SME landscape, for instance, more than 80% in average of African businesses are SMEs and micro businesses, and these have been really empowered. So power is going back to the SMEs thanks to fintech solutions that are enabling many Africans to access credit, knowing that 30% of Africans do not even have formal access to formal credit services because they don't have access to formal IDs probably. And since when we think of fintech, we think of a full ecosystem that's around fintech, including digital IDs that are solving many of these problems. We can also think of job creation. It's the continent that's seeking a lot of job creation through empowering SMEs and businesses. A lot of jobs are being created, qualified jobs, but also less qualified jobs. When we think of fintech solutions that are offering a lot of jobs for the agents that are serving in rural and areas. We can think of also of inclusion, of course. So a study in Tunisia has shown that 50% of the startups of the fintechs are trying to solve inclusion challenges because this is the real challenge. And entrepreneurs love problems that are big enough and interesting to solve. And then we can think of maybe last but not least the problem of the cross-border growth and development trade within the African market. So we know that Africa is actually a 1.3 billion market with 3.3 trillion market under the African continental free trade area, and this continent needs to figure out innovative ways for it to work together, for the countries to create trade avenues between each other. And probably the pandemic has been really a wake-up call for us to see that fintechs and innovative solutions are the way to go for the continent.
Yeah, great points around liquidity and how that is sort of something that technology can play a really big role in, and also in sort of interoperability from one market to the next, which I think we'll dive into a little bit. Bram, do you have anything to add?
No. So I think Amel actually captured very, very crucial point. And I think so. What fintech is doing is moving away from the traditional way of doing banking. So there are all these blocks that's been put and defined by the traditional bank, and then by drawing that line, we have left the marginalized, as she's putting it. And so what fintech is doing is saying, look, we are a risk-averse business. We don't care whether you're in the village, you don't have an ID, but we can still bring you in the formal financial sector. And that is what I think is a huge contribution from the fintech to the African continent, allowing us to tap into the marginalized groups, whether that is women and youth that would not have traditionally access to the finance services. So that's one big win for the fintechs in Africa.
Yeah, great point. And we've touched on this a little bit, but we know that Africa is often framed as one market, but in reality, it really is a cluster of markets. So I would love to get your perspectives on how much does local context actually matter in fintech? And then what sort of opportunities or barriers does this actually present for fintechs to grow? Munya, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Lewam. I think I mentioned this earlier, is that interoperability is key from a macro Africa perspective, but local context is so important. Understanding the nuances of what happens in a specific market. So I'll give you a very specific example in the context of Flutterwave, is that from a regulatory perspective, we are a highly regulated business, and regulation can show up at your door in the morning and say that this is how we need to change the way we need to do business. So from a business perspective, you have to ensure that you've got feet on the ground, a very good understanding of what is going on within an ecosystem, because if you don't do that, it's particularly for customers you support, it can be very challenging. So local context for me and for us as an organization is very key. And then sort of follow up to that question is that what should one be looking at? From a Floodway perspective, we highly believe in the idea of self-regulation, which means that innovation will always move faster than regulation. But what you have to do as an organization is continue to be at the forefront. We're seeing some radical changes in the FinTech payments ecosystem, but it's critical as organizations to always ensure that you're self-regulating and keeping up with all the various changes within the ecosystem. So I think for us, local context is key, even across a very diverse 54 Africa sort of country landscape.
Definitely. I think local context plays such a big role in what kinds of innovations can actually take off, what kind of innovations really suit a population. And there's absolutely differences in not only regulation, but also behaviors and currencies, that the approach really needs to be adapted on a country by country basis to some extent. Bram, do you have any thing to add on that topic of fragmentation, and how do we sort of encourage more interoperability, and what is the role that local context really plays, especially from your experience as an entrepreneur?
So I think it's very important. I've seen with us, so working in different jurisdiction, you'd find that if you don't play with the local context, for example, issues of consumer protection, how consumer protection issues will be framed in Zimbabwe, for example, will be very different in how they'll be framed in Malawi. And therefore, it's really important to make sure that you align with the local context. And then when you come to the issues of interoperability, I think the different challenges that we've seen in different jurisdictions. But I think what, for example, what Flutterwave is doing is sort of disrupting that space. You'd find that locally you have these pushbacks from maybe the regulator or from the individual financial institutions. But then with key players like Flutterwave, then obviously you find that as you're playing your role to try and fit into the local context, comes in this platform that allows you to borderlessly connect with your potential customers and push payments. And so that has really also helped to bring in more entrepreneurs, especially fintechs, and plug in and sort of be able to comply with the local context, but at the same time, interoperability across borders, not just within the country.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Amel, do you have anything to add on what you've seen local context sort of play a role, and then what opportunities or barriers you think exist because of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't underline enough what Munya and Bram has mentioned now as from the importance of the legal fragmentation of the legal framework, that frameworks that need to talk to each other. We need to have more coordination and collaboration between the legal frameworks. We will need to have, of course, fintechs play an important role there, but banks need to support as well. Once they understand that the collaboration is the name of the game, they will support in pushing the central banks to talk and also create an easier framework for interoperability. But maybe one other perspective to this, where the local versus regional context is kind of different across the continent. So we see there some disparities. If you look at the eastern and the southern parts of Africa, you see there a lot of focus on internationalization. So half of the entrepreneurs there are confident that they can compete on the European market, and that they're ready to go there. A lot of funds are flowing in from China, from India, from the US to the eastern part. However, when you look at the western part and northern part of Africa, you see a lot of focus on local markets and local solutions, and entrepreneurs are targeting more some kind of a regional expansion more than a global expansion. And this is also limiting the interest of international investors, because the scale is not what they have expected. They were thinking entrepreneurs in Africa would expand probably in the whole continent. So this leads us to probably just pause a little bit and use this type of platforms to rethink our narrative. What's the story we're telling to the world? Because the world is perceiving us as one place and as one country. However, we are so fragmented and so complex in a way. So maybe we need to tell different alternatives, different options, different narratives, just tell our story in a different way to the world.
That's a really great point. Yeah, I think in terms of how our markets are perceived, it's definitely like a singular macro story that's often told, when in reality it's 54 individual markets. And there's potential for certain business models to expand outside of Africa, and there's potential for certain business models to expand within Africa, and there's no sort of linear path in terms of expansion or scale when it comes to technology innovations, and there shouldn't be. But I'm curious to get everybody's opinion as well on how you sort of think that we can alleviate this sort of fragmentation in markets and the influence, or really the hurdle it sort of creates in scale. Because scaling obviously is really difficult for startups in our markets, especially in FinTech, because that's relatively heavily regulated. So what do you think we can do to sort of mitigate the challenges for a company to scale from one country to another country within Africa? Munya, I'd love to pick on you first with your Flutterwave perspective.
Sure. No, absolutely. I always like to say that it's a monumental task. I mean, we're up for it. We've done it. We continue to do it. But I will say that part of what you really need to do, I think, goes back to local context. So even though we've got 54 countries, and as a continent, it's critical to understand local context, and then also understand what we call our ideal customer profile, right? So when you look across the continent, is that the needs of our customer in Kenya may or may not be very different in Nigeria. There are ideal customer profiles where they are looking to scale across Africa, across the world. We have customers that are just in Kenya and want to be able to support that Kenyan business. So what drives our ability to support those customers is the infrastructure that we've built in place, right? Which is that I want to be able to support a business that wants to do M-Pesa in Kenya. I want to be able to support a business that is doing pay with bank transfer in Nigeria. So for us, our job really is to build that infrastructure so that entrepreneurs can come to us and say, look, I want local context. That's great. I want to be able to support a business in Malawi. But guess what? My roadmap for the next 5 years is I want to expand in that country. So I think we really, as a business, play a critical role, because we're removing the barrier of scale. And I think Amel mentioned this is one of the challenges for entrepreneurs and businesses has been, how do I scale? You've got venture capital, you've got investors that want to see that scaling happen, right? And so you look at what are those components that are restricting or limiting me from doing that. And one of them absolutely is looking around, how do I easily expand across multiple countries? But I think it's key for us is really having that local context, having that ideal customer profile, making sure as a Flutterwave, providing that infrastructure so that when businesses are looking to scale, we can easily support them.
Absolutely. I think infrastructure specifically plays like a really big role in being the first layer for everybody else to build on top of. And I know Flutterwave has done a pretty good and big job with that. Munya, would you mind quickly touching on the Grow with Flutterwave initiative that Flutterwave recently launched to help companies expand?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. One of the recurring themes that came from entrepreneurs is that, and by the way, COVID has been an interesting eye-opener for a lot of us, including myself, is that it's really made us think that maybe I can be global, right? I mean, so we roll out Flutterwave stores, which is our e-commerce storefront, a product. We've got about 40,000 businesses on that. And that came about, by the way, because of COVID. But in terms of Flutterwave Grow, that came about from entrepreneurs saying that the world's my oyster. I don't have to limit my business to Africa, right? But what do I do if I want to scale into the UK, into the US, or into Nigeria? One of the really challenging limiting factors is the idea of having to register a business with all the various paperwork. And I think there's some studies have been done through the World Bank about the ease of doing business. And one of the key aspects of the ease of doing business is how long does it take me to register a business in a country? I think Rwanda, from an Africa perspective, has shown that you can do it within a couple of hours, right? So I think the ease of doing business, not just across Africa, but across the globe, is critical. So as businesses scale, what Flutterwave Grow is doing is enabling entrepreneurs to say that, how do I register a business with ease in the UK, the US, and other markets? So we're really excited about that product, and more and more information should be coming out around that shortly. But again, driven by entrepreneurs on some of those pain points that are critical for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super interesting context as well, because I do think as this infrastructure layer sort of gets solved, a lot of the ability for a lot of entrepreneurs to scale will get easier over time. So that's definitely an encouraging development. So thank you for that perspective. So really quickly, wanted to think through, we're sort of talking about what is the future of fintech, or what can fintech be, or what has it been in the market thus far. But we know that even with growing internet penetration, our status quo is still very much offline. So what does this mean for the kinds of innovations that can drive financial inclusion today versus in the future? Amel, I would love to start with you and get your perspective.
Great. Yeah, I agree that we are kind of as a continent, we are still behind in terms of connectivity and affordable internet. However, Africa still has the highest growth rate of internet penetration in worldwide. So there is still hope there as well. And then we can also note that fintechs and entrepreneurs have managed to find their way through and have imagined a lot of solutions using legacy technologies like the USSD to access people in remote areas. So entrepreneurs, as usual, they just need a little bit of a conducive environment, and they will figure their way out. But we, of course, if we had more better internet, more and more solutions would have been accessible and to many people. So and then Africa stays actually the biggest digital opportunity for investors and for entrepreneurs, because of the highest number in the world of people who are unbanked. And if these people have access to internet, the opportunity is just massive. And we think of infrastructure, when we think of infrastructure, it's probably not only internet, because if we think fintechs, we will think of storage, of security aspects, but we know that this is not perfect yet, but the benefit that fintechs bring is much higher than the risks that come with a challenged type of infrastructure. So we definitely should go there and then enhance as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you in terms of like where the growth is sort of going. And as we get like higher internet penetration, there's a lot of promising infrastructure. There's also a lot of promising infrastructure, as you highlighted, like USSD, that doesn't necessarily need to leverage the internet. I'm curious, based on what we've been seeing, at least this year, with companies that focus on agent banking, like TMAPT and OPay, sort of doing really, really strong transaction volumes, we're still seeing that there's, a huge population that's offline and that relies mostly on agency sort of banking. And I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts on that, on meeting sort of the moment of now in terms of where we are, and then how that will change over time. Bram or Munya?
Bram, you want to take that?
Banking in Africa is always going to be, because when you talk about the agency banking, is one way of the bank to extend last mile connectivity. So as opposed to walking miles or cycling miles to a banking hall, what the bank are saying or what the fintechs are saying is we can extend your banking services and have that remote branch in the village for someone who is selling, has a walker, so you can walk in, deposit or cash out. So I think for me that is the future of banking in Africa, and I think it speaks directly to the last mile end user that we're trying to target. And when we talk about financial inclusion, can we do better around it? I think what Amel actually spoke earlier about the issues of making sure that we're using the services that are very close to the people, because when you look at Africa, there's a very small number of people that is connected to the internet, and therefore even the accessibility and affordability of the device itself, that is a smartphone, is still a challenge. And so we've seen in some contexts, other fintechs even just innovating around the SIM card. So if I can just take a SIM card and give it to the last mile end user and say, look, every time we'll be sending you money, you can go to the agent and cash out. You put your SIM card in his or her phone and cash out your funds. This is still to try and bridge the gap of the accessibility to the device. So the issue of the agency banking, for me, is the future in Africa. We just have to find a better model where, and we've seen this, as I think Munya put it, with the COVID, the regulations started opening up. Banks started opening up and accepting fintechs to say, come and play a huge role in what we're doing. And so if the banks can actually open up and expose the APIs, and leave the fintechs, take the agency banking and innovate around it, I think we can come up with a better model than it is now.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I agree. I think there's still a lot we can sort of do or grow in the agency banking, and the hurdles you sort of isolated around the affordability of devices, the affordability of data, all major issues that will be big hurdles to getting sort of mass adoption on like apps and stuff. So I think the agency banking sort of meeting people where they are today is a super interesting model. Munya, is there anything you want to add?
No, absolutely. I think that both Bram and Amel had some really critical and valid points. Just want to give you sort of a more practical, personal example. So my mother's 80 years old, and about a month ago, she called me in a panic because her WhatsApp wasn't working, right? And so you hear, and I think this week you heard that there'll be certain applications that will not be supported by WhatsApp. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this dichotomy that exists in Africa, which is that you've got my 80-year-old mother who's using a WhatsApp and she loves it, right? I've got my 87-year-old father who cannot stand using a phone, right? And so when you look at the more recent data that was produced by the International Data Corporation, what was fascinating was that there was a 13% increase in smartphone shipments out of Africa. I think something like 22 million. There was also an 11% increase in what I call a dumb phone, right? I'm from Zimbabwe. We call them kambuzis, and that's basically the analogy of that is it's actually a goat. And the reason why they call it a kambuzi is because it is, you can throw it on the wall, it'll still survive. It's got great battery power, and you can use it for days, right? So the reality of Africa is that as much as we're seeing this amazing smartphone penetration, the non-smartphone phones are still in popular demand. And so I think where the great opportunity is, and Amel mentioned USSD, the reality is even for Flutterwave, we support USSD payments. We're not seeing that going away anytime soon. So I think the entrepreneurs that will do well is trying to manage this dichotomy of the smartphone penetration, great story, but the reality on the ground is until devices significantly come down in price, people still love a phone where they don't have WhatsApp. It takes 100 megabytes of data to upload and update all my devices and security. So I think there's still that opportunity too for entrepreneurs, is how do you manage and mitigate an ecosystem where maybe the device itself is not necessarily fit for purpose, or all the apps themselves, right, are not fit for purpose for the African continent. So I think we'll see a lot of exciting opportunities, I think, in that area.
I agree, and I think that also goes back to the whole conversation of local context, and I think with to your point, Munya, the increase in the smartphone penetration and a lot of the growth that's happening sort of on the fintech innovation side, there's a lot of enthusiasm to sort of borrow from like Western markets in terms of like what has worked and what hasn't worked, and it's fascinating because we are actually still living in this dichotomy of like you kind of have to meet the customers where they are and like in what they're using, and you have to accommodate for that, and you have to sort of like go in with the local context in mind, instead of sort of taking a blueprint and trying to copy paste it into the African market. Uh, so love that point. Okay, great. So in terms of that topic that we're going down, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what we all think is preventing fintech from reaching its full potential and unlocking significant value for both the rural and urban unbanked and underbanked. How can we fix this? I know we touched a little bit on devices are expensive. We know that data is also fairly expensive. But I'm curious to hear if you think there are other big barriers that are sort of influencing a hurdle for fintech to reach some mass adoption in Africa.
Yeah,
I'll have
maybe
Amel
Do
go
you want to go
first.
first? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So I can think of a few points that still need to be solved in order for the fintechs to reach their full potential in Africa. For instance, the skills topic. So in order to develop world-class startups, more unicorns, we need, of course, more and more startups that are heavy consumers of brains and talent. And the tech talent is kind of concentrated in several areas of Africa. The size of the talent pool is probably also not sufficient. Plus, this COVID crisis has shown everyone that they can work from anywhere for any company in the world. So the competition for talent is getting even more fierce today. So figuring out ways to capture the potential of our own talent is actually a challenge. Plus, I had the discussion with a friend lately, and I love the point she brought up. She was like, "Yeah, we should stop congratulating ourselves for the amazing talent we have in Africa, because yes, we do have talent, of course, but we need to make sure we need just to think a little bit what kind of talent is actually needed to make a good fintech or startup work properly, because we don't only need engineers. We also need data scientists, we need business developers, we need UX designers, and the gap is there actually very important. So there is again a need of coordination and collaboration around a vision, a story for Africa. If we want to go big there, what do we need? What are the prerequisites? We need to develop talents here and there, increase the collaboration between countries so that we can have a fluent mobility of talent, because mobility is also a challenge. Flying from one country to another in Africa is just very often you have to go through Paris, so it's just not acceptable.
Yes.
So and then we have, of course, the cash. I think our biggest competitor is within us. We still have economies that are so heavily relying on cash. So we see it, of course, you can see it as the enemy in us, but also an opportunity, because this is the opportunity we're going after through fintechs. And then the key point of collaboration and convergence, interoperability between the different players, interoperability on the governance level, on the legal frameworks level, on the technical level, wallet to wallet, wallet to bank, bank to bank, and the collaboration between the different stakeholders, because this is actually a big game that we need to define together and go after together. Maybe one last thing, one of the biggest challenges, or what's preventing yet the fintech space to reach its full potential, is having access to adequate financing. I know there are disparities, of course, in the continent. South Africa would probably, or Nigeria would qualify their VC space as mature. However, Tunisia or Ghana or other countries might say, yeah, it's still in the baby steps. So, but having access to adequate financing, be it FDIs or internal or local funding, is actually critical. Knowing that if we compare Africa to to South America, for instance, to Latin America, we would probably say that there are mega deals that are being closed there. However, despite the recent unicorns in Africa, most of the deals are pre-seed and seed, which means that we have a big pipeline developing, which is a good sign. However, we need to make sure that we have enough funding available to convert to turn this pipeline into something really cool.
All really, really great points, Amel. And I think that the last point that you made specifically around funding and availability of funding is a big one, because as we know that the amount of funding that's going into African startups and Africa FinTech has increased significantly, but it has only really increased in certain demographics. There are a handful of countries that get a majority of the capital that goes into funding startups in Africa, and there's quite a few markets that are still considered a little bit more frontier that could benefit from significant financing. So I think that that's a great point. Bram, do you have anything to add?
Yes. So I think everything that I was actually giggling because Emma was touching on very critical points. The fact that you have to fly from, you're going to Morocco, you have to fly out of Africa and come back in Africa, speaks volumes about our policies and I think how we need to address our problems. But I think, so adding on to the challenges that Emma actually highlighted, we also have a number of areas that require intervention. So for example, countries like Tunisia, really great work on the Startup Act, because what that has done is it put up a proper, bedrock for startups and entrepreneurs to thrive, and with support from the stakeholders like government, even the regulator in the financial sector. That is, I think, what we need. That's a model that we need in Africa. You'd find that in some other jurisdiction, if you were to go to a regulator with your innovation and you explain what it is that you're trying to push in the market, in most circumstances, my experience is that the regulator will tell you that they don't understand what you're trying to do, and therefore will turn you back and don't know whether you need a license or you need to be licensed. So we need also to look at the financial regulator within the African region to understand and catch up with the growing trends within the fintech space. That is number three is the issue of the digital literacy and financial literacy within the continent itself. So you find that without raising awareness, someone would prefer walking 20 kilometers just to access a banking hall, where they would have done that at the comfort of their home, just to dial a short code and check the balance. But they would prefer, because they don't know issues of digital literacy and also issues of financial literacy, that they can actually do this for free, on their mobile phone. So we do have a number of challenges. Entrepreneurs and fintechs are very excited about the latest technologies, but on the other hand, you have the users that are not aware on how these services can actually better their lives. How can they use these services? And then on the other hand, you also have the regulator who says, oh, we understand sandbox regulations, but this is the context of our understanding, is that you come to us, you apply for the license, and there's always this fight between the fintechs and the regulators saying, no, this is the version of sandbox regulations. And then you say, no, but there's a model in Nigeria, there's a model in Mozambique, how the central bank are doing it there. So I think there's a need for a proper coordination and obviously to look at issues of regulations, policy issues, and then digital literacy issues.
Absolutely. I think the point you made around educating the regulators, absolutely a big one, and so is digital and financial literacy. That's definitely lacking in some regions. Munya, did you have anything to add?
Yes. Has made significant progress in that area. I think when you look at sandboxes, it's always, I imagine it being one of those sort of initiatives that happens in the UAE and the US, but it's actually exciting to see that more and more countries across Africa are experimenting with sandboxes, which is a good sign. And I think that's also part of the whole idea that innovation is moving a whole lot quicker. I was fortunate to be on a panel in South Africa that are actually rethinking the whole idea of the South African Reserve Bank, FinTechs being part of the ecosystem, other stakeholders redefining what this world looks like. So I think we're making, as a continent overall, some significant progress when it comes to this whole idea of sort of regulatory frameworks and sandboxes. Just to touch on Amal's point, I do think we have a crisis when it comes to talent. Just to be very practical and real about it, is that when you look at Africa, we've traditionally been a continent that has educated people to be in certain careers, and no fault of their own. I know when I was young, the whole idea of being sort of in the entrepreneurial ecosystem just didn't exist. You were either a lawyer, doctor. There was very specific career paths, right? And I think that what you're seeing is the likes of Africa Leadership Academy with Fred Swanepoel that are redefining and saying, look, we need an educational system that reflects where Africa will be in 20 years. What Africa Leadership Academy is doing is saying we want to train up the next 1,200 entrepreneurs for the future. So I think that is just in itself a really critical aspect. And again, to what Amel was speaking about, it's not just the entrepreneurs, it's the whole ecosystem, the marketing, the engineers, the data science that all support this new world we live in. I think that's critical. Then the last point is really about what Village Capital is doing. Yes, we do have, despite all the venture capital that's coming into Africa, it's not enough. The ecosystem requires different capital requirements in the journey of an entrepreneur. And I'm familiar with Village Capital's viral model, which is that it's not, are you investment ready? Do you have the right framework for you then to be investment ready? So I think there's a lot we need to do around skills development, around making sure we've got the adequate skills to drive growth within entrepreneurs, but also the right framework and also the right investors that are ready at the right period in time to be able to help the businesses and entrepreneurs scale.
Absolutely, all great points. I think the point about ecosystem development and investment readiness is a big one that we're working on at Village Capital, obviously. And the skills gap point that Amel brought up is also a huge one that I think the whole sort of we need a lot more innovation in educational infrastructure to be able to support that next generation of leaders in tech. Okay, really quickly, before we hop into Q&A, I would love for each of the panelists to just give us like a very quick vision of what you think African FinTech will look like in a decade. And I would love to start with Bram. What are your big dreams for Africa FinTech?
Wow, that's yeah. I think for the African FinTech in the next decade, we're looking at cross-border seamless interoperable platforms that are able to, seamlessly just push money from Malawi all the way to Nigeria, with proper regulations within our financial, regulators. But also, I think I see, a decade from now, I think we're going to have a well-mature market for the continent. So much that the issues of talent and obviously knowing what we really want to offer for the people in Africa will come very, very clear, because we have seen a lot of studies being done and then trying to refine the space of the FinTech. So I think the future is bright for the FinTech space in Africa.
Thanks, Bram. Amel?
Yeah, I tend to be an optimistic, exactly like Bram, so or any other entrepreneur. Actually, I see actually the next decade as the awakening decade. Probably the COVID crisis has magnified our challenges. But also the opportunity of turning. So we understood what our problems are, or hopefully we did. So we know what are the problems to be solved. So it's just about having the entrepreneur entrepreneurs find a way to solve them. I see a lot of growth being fueled by international FDIs that will encourage probably also African investors to invest. Typically, it's the other way around, but now we see that the world is getting interested in Africa, and this is actually showing us how much potential we actually have. So I see big platforms emerging, giving us our data sovereignty back, because I think this is one of the big challenges also in Africa. And I see a lot of maybe this is also from a kind of an anthropology type of view. I see a lot of people seeing Africa as the place to be for innovation communities. So the new governance of the world is revolving around the communities somehow. And communities is actually part of our DNA. We are a continent where we were born in communities, where we collaborate in communities, maybe out of necessity, but it's part of our DNA. And this nurturing this type of communities will be probably one of our differentiators and will be growing bigger. So I'm not like I don't have a scenario of a utopia or dystopia type of a scenario, but I was listening lately to someone who describes herself as a futurist, and she was describing the future as something she was calling protopia. So maybe we just should enjoy the journey to prototype and find out if it's a utopia or dystopia or whatever. So it's just a prototyping our future and seeing it happen. But we just need to do something about it, and that's why I really applaud what Flutterwave, what Munya is doing in terms of private sector initiative, what Seagull Family Foundation is doing with the BMW Foundation, in offering this opportunity for us to talk and think, because we need to do something, because the cost of doing nothing is so much higher than any risk of doing errors here and there.
Absolutely. I love that point. I love the optimism. I'm an optimist myself as well. Munya, do you have anything to add really quickly before we move into Q&A?
Yes, if you think Amel and Bran and yourself are optimists, I'm the eternal optimist. So, I actually think that fintech might not exist as we know it today. We might not even be using the word fintech. And when I think about, so we as Flutterwave support some amazing customers like Uber, and I was thinking today about my Uber experience. So I'm here in Nairobi, Kenya. I jump into an Uber, and like 5 minutes later, I get this notification that rate your driver. Yesterday, we also had lunch where we used Uber Eats as a payment. So I think where we're moving fairly quickly is into the whole idea of experiential finance, where fintech is just another component of a whole experience. Like Uber wants you to have the Uber experience. Payments is just one of those elements that allows you as an Uber rider or an Uber Eats customer to enjoy that experience. And I think that we are seeing the foundation of that. And so I think if you looked at, if you asked me what the crystal ball would look like, I don't think fintech might be a word we're using in 10 years' time. I think we will be talking about experiential finance. We're looking at very specific use cases around how finance is just, or fintech is a foundation to do other things, whether it's health tech or whether it's insurance tech or all the different industries that really that are cross-cutting across Africa. So I think for me that is something I'm really looking forward to, is that we may not be talking about the fintech as we know it today.
Yeah, great point. And actually touching on that as we transition into Q&A, one of the big questions here is, how is fintech going to enhance the way money moves in the future? And specifically, is there also an opportunity for crypto in making sort of transactions more affordable? Or how do we sort of move forward beyond USSD, because that's what most people are using? I'm curious to get your perspectives on that. Amel or Munya, whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, go ahead, Munya. This is your field of expertise.
Okay, sure. So I think the reality is that, and you'll see this publicly, is that Africa is the third largest crypto market in the world. And when you start to look at the use cases as to why is that the case, right? The markets where we've seen significant crypto usage has really been in markets where there's been uncertainty about FX, or uncertainty or trust around, is my money safe, right? And so I say it's the reality is that crypto is not going away anytime soon. In fact, we've probably seen an acceleration of that. And so to answer that question, I would say that yes, we are seeing that being so critical as part of the general ecosystem. What's encouraging is that we have seen some interesting developments from a governmental level. For example, e-Naira in Nigeria. We've seen some interesting developments in South Africa where people are looking at digital currencies, right? So I think we're definitely going to be seeing a lot more use cases around crypto. The key thing I would always say is that what's the use case? If it allows us to move money more efficiently across borders with transparency, there are so many interesting use cases around that. And I think certainly from a crypto perspective, we'll be keeping an eye on that because it's not going away anytime soon. And I think just seeing governments realizing that this is here to stay, I think certainly is something we'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, maybe adding on what you said, Munya, I totally agree, actually. However, I would like to highlight the disparities, again, between the different parts of the continent, because we are seeing wherever crypto is allowed to be used, and developing use cases is actually what we're looking for, is the challenge. You find in other places in the continent, North Africa, for instance, everything related to blockchain and crypto is still not allowed, not permitted in terms of legal framework. So because of protected, not interchangeable or currencies, closed markets. So this is making them, the regulators and central banks, being even more skeptical when it comes to resistant, I would say. I don't know how long they are going to be able to resist. There is some curiosity and interest, but we need to speed up, because the world is not waiting. And what we can do is actually create this or leverage existing platforms for learning between different parts of Africa. So North Africa can learn a lot from developments in sub-Saharan Africa, because the use cases are just there. People need to develop trust in their states, and this can be done through technology. People need ideas, and this can be done through blockchain and crypto. And so the use cases are actually there and massive, and just need to be tested and developed, and they're here to stay, and they're not leaving any sooner, as you said, Munya.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we'll hopefully see a little bit more buy-in from regulatory bodies in the future, so that that's able to develop these use cases extensively and actually really be able to grow them in practice. But I agree, it's not going anywhere anytime soon, and has a lot of potential. We're just still sort of seeing where that will land, especially in terms of financial inclusion. Who it will actually benefit? Is it actually going to be able to benefit people that are lower income, a little bit more at the bottom of the pyramid, or is it more of an asset? I think that remains to be seen, and we'll see over time how that evolves. Sort of in line with that, how can Africa, one of the other questions was, how can Africa promote like real financial inclusion? And I think this sort of touches on the how could Africa FinTech specifically, it touches on the conversation we're having around being in a dichotomy of like different populations utilizing or having access to sort of different technologies. And one of the questions that I sort of started to think about as I was asking this one is, will there ever be a case where we'll have sort of one path of financial inclusion for a population, or do we think it's always going to be living in this dichotomy of like a population that's sort of a little bit lower income, out of reach, smartphones are out of reach, data is out of reach, so they're using other technologies, versus a different population that's a little bit more higher income, using smartphones and such technologies. I'm curious to get both of your perspectives on, do we think that dichotomy will converge, and then do we think that there's one way or another to create that real financial inclusion?
I could probably jump in on that one.
Yeah.
I think the way you put it is might let us think, of course, that the access to different technologies might exacerbate these inequalities. But I think eventually availing different types of technology is actually a way to push enhance equalities and give the chance for the have-nots to catch up with innovation and have some kind of access while waiting for the states and governments to work on the infrastructure challenges. And then we tend very often when we think of inclusion to think of consumers and individuals. But I think this fintechs and innovation has been also a means to include businesses as well, and include also consumers and individuals through including empowering businesses. Because if we have, for example, instead of expensive point of sales devices, we offer the possibility to use your own phone or mobile. This is a way to push actually more inclusion for micro businesses. What we should probably do as countries, as states, as in partnership with probably also international partners, is support these businesses on the way to their digital transformation as well. Understand what kind of tools are available. Bram touched on this earlier. Like people go many miles because they don't know what's out there. So have some kind of work on the digital literacy, but even I would even go further into transformation of the existing models, tools, and the way people do business. So I think this is going to be probably, as the dichotomy will stay a few more years, and it's not that bad actually, because it's as long as we work on ways to converge, because this will come sooner or later.
Great points, Amel. Munya, do you have anything to add before we move into the
Yeah,
next
no, I
section?
was just nodding my head as I fully agree. And in fact, I like to think about the analogy that, when the ATM came out, people were like, there's no way that I'll ever need to go access, financial services elsewhere. But the reality is ATMs still exist today. So it's you can still get there, but it's there are now all these different methods of being able to access your funds. So I think for me, I fully agree that it's just that journey and how that happens, and that dichotomy will exist. But I think we can still drive towards financial inclusion. But I think the reality is to understand that the dichotomy exists, and for entrepreneurs, there's an opportunity to really make sure that in the solutioning that we're keeping those two dichotomies or the dichotomy in consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a popular question we've gotten. With the Africa continent growing younger, youth unemployment remains a significant challenge. How does FinTech change that narrative? It's a heavy question. Amel, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, absolutely. We touched up a little bit on this question earlier, because any economic development that is enabled by technology and by innovative solution will definitely create jobs. And then, of course, the question is, are these jobs interesting enough for the growing youth? There will be a diversity of jobs, qualified and less qualified. So I think fintechs and innovation and startups is a massive opportunity to create direct jobs within the startups, but also indirect through the economic value they are creating in the countries. Maybe this leads me to an important point for our continent, very quickly. So we will create value as long as the innovation and the intellectual property stays in the countries. So we're seeing a lot of startups who want to go global, which is totally understandable, or want to grow, and they start in markets that are very small, which is of course growth limiting. And since growth within Africa is still a little bit challenged, they tend to move to the US or to Europe, which takes the whole value and the whole intellectual intellectual property to there. And then it still means job creation in Africa. However, it's not the same value and same impact that is created there. So we need to make sure also on the from the regulatory perspective and from a doing business perspective, as Munya mentioned earlier, that we create a conducive space for our startups to grow in Africa so that they can create more value and more jobs in Africa.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I know Bram just joined us and we have about a minute left. The only question I will ask Bram is around digital literacy and financial literacy. One of the questions was, how do we sort of influence or increase that? I'm curious for your perspectives, Bram.
Yeah, I think so. What I think is the biggest solution to that is for fintechs that are trying to innovate within the space, the likes of Flutterwave and enabling other fintechs to tap into their platform, is I think issues of digital and financial literacy should be part of our strategy. You cannot just come up with a very innovative idea and then leave out the part where you educate your users on how they can actually benefit or use your platform. That is number one. Now, the question is whether that also has to be has to come out strong on the regulations from the financial regulator point of view, to make sure that when we are pushing innovations and fintech innovations, the aspect of consumer protection that incorporates issues of financial literacy and digital literacy are also incorporated within our strategy. I think that for me can play a huge role. We've seen in other jurisdictions financial literacy have been incorporated in the career in the schools, but I think we can still do more if we all the stakeholders do their part in the space.
Absolutely, and I think that's such an important role that we need to isolate and figure out how do we effectively create that digital literacy and financial literacy, because that's going to be a big gap going forward. Great. I know we are a little bit over time, but I wanted to thank our panelists so much for all the time that they spent and their thoughtfulness and initiative here to sort of share their perspectives. Hopefully this was a great conversation for you all, and it was informative and educational. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lewam, for the amazing moderation and the great conversation, Munya and Bram. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.